Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. I am so excited to be moderating today's conversation with our panel of speakers. I have with me today three retail experts from the US and the UK to discuss the in-store customer experience and trends of 2022. This webinar's panels include there we go. The ex-Old Navy Chief of Staff and BI consultant, Marc Schwarzbart, Lucy Gibbs, the Head of Retail and Consumer Retail at Alchemmy, and the co-founder and CEO of Oravision, Dr. Daniel Martinho-Corbishley. Did I say right? Not right? I hope I said that right.
You're close enough.
Apologies. So we will cover today the impact of labor shortages, the what and how of interactive retail, as well as Gen Zs and their expectations of physical retail. Plus, it won't be a conversation about trends, really, if we don't at least touch about the lovely economic phenomenon that we're currently experiencing, which is inflation and recession, and its immediate impact on the high street retailers. And as we are live from London, it's only fitting that we analyze how both retailers and consumers are reacting to the passing of the longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. For our attendees, if you have any questions during the talk, please don't hesitate to drop them in the chat. We will have some time at the end of the event to answer all of your questions in detail. So without further ado, let's crack on with the first trend, automated technology and how it helps retailers handle the labor shortages. After COVID, we have seen some major shifts in the workplace as retail stores were closed, and many have found themselves reconsidering moving into different industries and building skills in these new industries, which has made it harder for retailers to hire back when everything got back to normal. So how can technology help retailers with this issue? It's only fitting that we start with Marc as the ex-Old Navy Chief of Staff. What do you think retailers can do about hiring back the staff, the workforce that they lost during this last period?
Yeah, I mean, I think but before we get into the automated technology piece of it, I mean, I think we should start with just the human element of trying to get people back working in stores. You know, whether we talk about the effects of COVID, the effects of recession, you know, shopping in a retail store, especially given everything that's going on, is a different experience than it used to be. I can't speak to the UK specifically, but in the US, there are plenty of stores you walk into now that feel still very much like they did, you know, shortly after things reopened during COVID. Shelves half empty, staffing levels at you know, rock bottom or below levels. I mean, there are stores you can walk into. It's hard to figure out if anyone is actually there working. So when we start talking about getting people back into stores, we've got to start talking about creating a work environment that is going to be fun and exciting to work in, that is going to, one, be interesting for customers to shop at, but more importantly, we're asking, you know, our employees to spend their entire day there. And if the stores look ravaged because we can't get product in to fill the shelves, or we're staffing a store that used to have 5 to 10 people working with 2 or 3 people, you're not going to create an environment that is going to keep people there and engaged and working for you. And at the end of the day, if you don't have engaged employees in your store, when you do get that customer to walk through the door, the odds of you converting that into a sale, let alone a you know, a full potential sale, is near zero. So I think we really need to get our hands back on, we're not just trying to staff our stores with bodies. We need to get back to having happy, healthy employees who are excited to come to work and who will engage with our customers as they walk through the door. And I think there are far too many retailers today overlooking that fact and just looking to staff at the bare minimum because that's what the dollars and cents say that you should do. And so then we start looking at technology and what can we do to improve this. So, you know, there are technologies that can help you better understand your traffic patterns, the flow of people, so you can staff more appropriately. But those are not going to be a replacement for the fact that we still need to have happy and healthy people working in our stores. So the technology piece is great for understanding where do we really need to get those people staffed? What are the days of the week, times of the day? And that is changing from the way it used to be with flexible work schedules and things like that. It's not always just Saturdays and Sundays anymore, or I shouldn't say it's not always that case for every retailer. So what do those traffic patterns look like? When do we need to be better staffed? And when we are better staffed, do we need to look beyond simply what the recent trend in sales is saying about what those staffing levels should be? Because if not, are we in some kind of a doom loop here where more customers may walk in? If we don't have people to meet their needs, they're going to walk back out. You're never going to turn that visit into a sale. You're never going to see your sales turn back around. You're never going to have the dollars that you need to reinvest in greater staffing. So there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem here. And it's about figuring out how to invest in your people to create a happy work environment in the store. And that will then feed through to the customer experience. But until we get back to a reasonable staffing level that has enough support in the store for the people who are working there to feel happy, to feel supported by the company, and to then re-engage directly with the customer instead of just dreading going to work every day, retailers are going to have a hard time, I personally think, getting the customers back through their doors, and when getting them to return over and over once they experience what's going on in the store.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Mark said. I think focusing on the you know, what retains staff in stores. I think the headline message there was that by understanding what workers want in a job, retailers can actually create a competitive advantage to retain staff. And there was an interesting stat I saw from one of the articles, was that the quit rate in US retail is 70% higher than the average quit rate across all other industries in the US, which is shockingly very high. And the number one cited reason was like lack of flexibility in the workplace. That's why employees are quitting. And it's an interesting reason because other industries don't have that reason. It's specific to retail. And it makes sense because I guess it's difficult for retailers to create a flexible working environment when you have to have staff on the clock from, you know, whenever it is 9 till 6 p.m. in the day. So what can retailers do about that? I think is a really, really key question to make the working environment better. A lot of what retailers are doing are giving staff more autonomy. Ironically, you know, rather than automating the store, giving the staff more autonomy themselves, so they can actually swap shifts out, they can adapt to their working patterns within themselves without having to go to upper management all the time and ask again to switch out their shift. So I think that's a really interesting trend that we're seeing in the market at the moment. And so what we do is actually help retailers make these gains incrementally. So I think there's a lot, going back to the autonomous store piece, I think a lot of people think about autonomous stores being this kind of utopia where absolutely everything is automated. There's no human interaction. It's just you walk in, you pick stuff off the shelf and you walk out again. But what we really focus on doing is helping retailers, you know, harness their existing infrastructure, their existing security cameras to understand what's happening in the stores so they can make small incremental changes without having to turn their operations on their heads. And one of the biggest wins we've seen recently is actually with like a multi-brand luxury product retailer, have very large stores, large department stores across multiple floors. And one of the things we're helping them with is by measuring their customer demand very precisely. we can get them to allocate their staff in slightly more sophisticated ways. So they've always got the right number of staff members on during these different peaks and troughs of customer demand. I think that kind of goes back to what Mark was saying, and not getting stuck in this death cycle where you only allocate staff when conversion times are low or high, depending on your strategy, and you start missing all these opportunities. But by actually looking at what customers are doing, making sure your staffing rotas are matched to that, you can create a better experience both for the customers and for the staff members, so that they're not experiencing these huge peaks in demand with an under-allocated staffing rota. So by improving that experience for the staff, you're going to improve the customer experience, ultimately improving conversions. We actually saw in 3 months a 0.75% increase in conversion rates just by taking the existing staffing rota and just shifting it around a little bit. We weren't adding or removing staff throughout the week, just finding out where they needed a few more heads on at this particular checkout or this particular floor in the store. And that was a really big win, so that really the retailer can ultimately focus on other things that they need to improve, like the brand experience, rather than micromanaging these optimizations with staffing allocations.
Definitely, and kind of building on both those 2 points combined, it's definitely how do you not only better sense your demand, but how do you free your staff up to serve and do the work that they're really interested in doing as well, to play into that kind of value proposition for the employee too that Mark was talking about. So I think in the UK in particular, we've had the impact of Brexit followed by COVID, and it's really taken its toll on the network, both from a front of house in-store perspective, but also in distribution centres as well. There's been definite price wars happening between your Amazon warehouses and other local distributors in the area too, which is really pushing up again the wages and the costs that kind of coming through and of everything else in the supply chain too. So this is where things like intelligent automation can really start to make a really big impact. What we're looking at quite a lot in Alchemmy is how we can actually standardize and operationalize some of those really kind of standard and repeatable processes to be able to free those staff up to complete the more value adding task as well, to kind of feed into that satisfaction. So how can we start looking into that and really optimize and kind of improve through automation and standardization some of those day-to-day tasks, and use better use of data for reporting and creating the right metrics to hand as well to make the staff's jobs easier and kind of a bit more insightful as well. So you kind of bring a slightly different skill set into store as well.
I think that's a really interesting, sorry.
I was just going to say, and just bringing that back to the human element. I mean, the automation, using the data to figure out where the wasted time is, where to me, it all comes back to making that employee feel valued and making them happy to be at work during the day. Whether they're really busy or they have one customer in the store, if they are engaged with that customer and obviously happy to be working, they're going to have a successful interaction with that customer, regardless of how busy they actually are. And the customer will feel that. So can retailers, focus their efforts using the data available to them to identify those pain points that those employees are feeling? What are those tasks that are just time-consuming, repetitive, boring, frankly, that can be automated away to allow the employees to focus on that more person-to-person engagement with customers, which ultimately, if you work in retail, is part of what drives you, right? You're there to talk to people, and so get your employees' time out of the repetitive computer backroom task to get them out on the floor engaged with customers.
I think a really interesting point that Lucy mentioned was intelligent automation. And I'd really like to come back to that and find out a little bit more from you, Lucy, like what you actually mean by that and what the various ways of doing that are. Because I think it's an interesting point to kind of define what automation actually is in retail. There are so many different ways that you can implement it. And as kind of mentioned, I think when I think of it, I think Amazon Fresh, checkoutless stores, nothing going on in the front of house with staff. But I think ultimately, whatever you implement, it has to be in the consumer's benefit. It either has to improve the customer experience pretty significantly in some cases, or reduce prices, right? Cutting costs is the other way that you can look at it. And there's been interesting kind of news articles about Amazon recently with the walkout technology. They're pushing that quite heavily at the moment, but they actually cut back on plans to expand in the UK to quite a number of stores. They cited the cost of living crisis as one of them, but also a lack of sales. And I think it might be, my take on it is that they haven't quite got the product market fit right there, because they've gone the whole hog. They've tried to automate the entire thing, which is really cool, and it's definitely disrupting grocery at the moment, and major groceries are taking note of what's happening there. But they haven't quite got the price characteristics right. The cost of implementing that across these stores is very high. Cost of products were high. Maybe wasn't quite getting there on the customer experience side, and they hadn't quite got that product market fit right. So they've kind of pared back on that. And I think that's an interesting learning, because other retailers can't afford to make the kind of mistakes, the kind of experiments that Amazon, they can just shoot out something here and there and it's great. But if you're an established retailer, it's much more difficult to do that. So having those incremental steps, the most obvious one is self-checkouts, right? Where Tesco, and I'm trying to think who else, they're actually Zara, they're rolling out self-checkouts exclusively across some stores. You can't even go and talk to a cashier now. You have to go through self-checkouts. So that's kind of the intermediary step. But I'd love to hear kind of more from Lucy on automation and some of the other ways that you can do that.
Yeah. So I'll just answer your question. I think we're being nudged to move on to the next topic. But in terms of intelligent automation, again, it's one of those buzzwords people talk about a lot. So really it's around the kind of combination of kind of automating processes in a more traditional sense, but combining that with overlaying it with, and in combination with either artificial intelligence, RPA, robotic process automation as well. So giving that kind of intelligent aspect to it, kind of machine learning potentially overlay to that as well. So examples of this, and you're right, it's kind of going straight towards the Amazon model is not feasible or kind of practical for a lot of retailers. However, those kind of incremental steps are kind of really important on what you can do. You've mentioned a couple, and there's a few more kind of back office ones as well, such as processing some of the claims and invoice creation to suppliers, things like monitoring inventory and making sure you're generating the right notifications and reordering products. A lot of that can be done very manually in a lot of retailers, and those processes can also be automated from that point of view as well. So definitely kind of looking at that end-to-end network and working out where is the time being spent today, mapping those processes and understanding where is the opportunity for automation capabilities within that as well, and what is the right level of and sophistication of automation to be applied, rather than jumping straight to your end kind of shiny products as well.
Yeah, and I would just say also just even around scheduling. I mean, the amount of manual work that over the last, let's call it 5 years, I have seen at various retailers that even though they may have scheduling software or tools they have built to schedule their staff at the retail store, at the end of the day, it's still a store manager with an Excel sheet making final tweaks and adjustments and sending the thing out. So there are definite areas of automation and technology where some retailers may be behind the curve that will really move the needle on this in terms of flexibility for employees around scheduling, trading shifts, things like that, things that in the past were very, very difficult to do that today technology can help with and may alleviate a major pain point that retailers have always had with their staff, which is that the flexibility of hours and being able to trade things around, which in a gig economy is so much easier now with so many different jobs.
Amazing hearing though the different perspectives on this, but for me, what I learned, just to summarize what you guys said in a few points. So although there is a lot to automate inside the store, it's important for the retailer to have the physical store's data and automate aspects that allow staff to have more flexibility, give them more autonomy into how they're running the stores, and eventually just using what all the technologies they currently have into the stores to extract as much data as possible. And so from there, we'll move on to the next trend, which I think, Daniel, you find lot to say about this, which is that interactive retail experiences bridge the gap between a store's online and offline parts. How do you see the online and offline experience kind of merging, and why do retailers really need to do this in 2022?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. It's one of the largest trends, I'd say, in the industry right now. Before it used to be like online versus offline, like how can offline retailers compete with their online competitors? But I think now retailers are starting to see that online and offline are two essential channels to the shopping journey. So whether customers start online or offline is actually becoming a little bit less important. But the key challenge is how can they recreate online e-commerce insights inside their offline physical stores, where it's typically much harder to capture that kind of data. And I think the other big trend, kind of linking it back to the previous topic, is autonomous versus experiential, which seems to be this polarization in the retail landscape, where at one end you have retailers moving to full autonomous, just everything is about efficiency for both the customer and the retailer. And at the other end, you have brands that are trying to drive loyalty and drive engagement and ultimately increase their conversion rates through experiential shopping formats. And so I think it's a really, really exciting space right now. We're seeing so many incredible examples of retailers really pushing the boat out and trying new things with AR and VR experiences. There was a really public one with Gucci and Snapchat recently. I've personally used the IKEA at home app that allows you to visualize your furniture inside your living room before you make a purchase, which is pretty cool, and size things up. There's lots of pop-up concepts happening at the moment, with vans driving around and giving customers and fans of the brands kind of exclusive access to new products. And there are also immersive experiences as well. So walking into the store and being led on a journey and being told a story, and I think those are particularly interesting. But when I think about big brands like Nike, for example, announced that they may be closing 145 of their 477 stores. And I think about a brand like that, I think like, what does an online only version of Next actually look like? Like, how would they compete with someone like ASOS or Boohoo online? How does that kind of competitive landscape work? And for me personally, it always comes back to getting retailers and brands to really think about innovating in their physical spaces and making the most of those tangible interactions that they can generate with their consumers, and really creating this store as an experience. So we work with a lot of innovative retailers like Situ Live and in the UK, Neighborhood Goods in the US, and they're doing amazing jobs at creating this kind of store as an experience for their customers. And really importantly, they're sharing data back with their brand partners. So they host new independent brands alongside established brands in their stores, but they're tracking every single customer engagement with those to try and figure out, what is the best product market fit, and trying to share that information, become a bit of a marketing engagement platform for those brands. And this definitely seems to be the future area of experiential retail, where you can start becoming like a data platform, not only for yourself, but also for the brands that you host. So having that infrastructure, I'm sure we'll come back to this again and again in this talk, but having that infrastructure of being able to collect the data and having the ability to measure it is just so important for whatever experience or experiment you're looking to run in the store. And really, we're just trying to raise awareness that retailers already have the ability to measure that. They already have security cameras in their store. They can capture data from that, and they can measure exactly what customers are engaging with and for how long, for everything that they're testing and experimenting with in their stores.
Completely agree. And that's really interesting, Daniel, and a great way to add some data points in there. As you mentioned, I think the lines between physical and digital have never really been more blurred than they are today. I think we've had over 70% of interactions now involve more than one channel with a retailer. And the pandemic's really increased the digital share significantly. And we're also very much more mobile first in terms of consumers as well. So it's how do you start to build that into your store proposition? And as you mentioned, things like AR and VR aren't new, but the kind of tech advancements have really made it much more accessible now to use it and effectively in stores. So what we do quite a lot of at the moment is working with a lot of high street brands in looking at how to use data to help build that business case and find what's right for their brand as well, and how to meet their customer needs. There's so much stuff out there at the moment. There's a huge amount of innovation in tech, and you've got metaverse on the horizon, as well as your other in-store experiences, and how to be more interactive in store as well, with kind of being the look and touch and feel of a product, but you might not see the sale of that within that store. So your stores might not look like they're very profitable, but how do you actually capture that element as part of the holistic journey? So adding more data points in stores is super helpful. And even then, I think, you know, you've got that online in-store as well as in-store online as well. So I think John Lewis is a really good example of pre-pandemic, they're investing in experiences like cookery classes, personal shopper experiences. But when the stores all shut in COVID, they had to flip that and kind of bring that experience online with live cookery classes and sessions and on sleep and cardio health on their website as well. So it's how to kind of make sure you're getting that seamless experience across the brand, across your different channels, and be able to measure that through kind of different test and learn, kind of actually what does that then actually mean in terms of sales and uplift to the bottom line as well. So that's there, I think, is the challenge at the moment, is how to measure it and get those data points across. And we're doing quite a lot of work in that space, and those experiential, and also building those business cases to find out which are the areas that you should be investing in today to get yourselves fit for the future.
Yeah, and I will add my view on this topic, maybe a little different or a little more reserved, in that I look at this very much as beware of the shiny new object, right? Don't forget the basics of business: right product, right place, right time, right price. Not to say that everything discussed here isn't important, isn't critical. It is, but not at the expense of the core business, of making sure that, you know, if you've got a store that sells a particular product, you've got to have that product in stock. You know, as retailers look for ways to better integrate the online and offline experiences, make sure that actually adds to the customer experience. So a lot of retailers have done great jobs about making it easy to see store inventory online, so you know before you go, are they going to have what you want, or you order it so you can pick it up quickly. All of these things that, you know, sound like table stakes, but, you know, even in the last few years, retailers are still coming up to speed on some of them, even though we've been talking about them for years, if not over a decade in some cases. But the flip side of that is, if you can see the inventory in your store, and this happened to me this past weekend with a retailer that I won't name, but I did not make the trip, because by looking online, I found they had nothing of what I wanted, and I wanted a lot of things, and none of it was in stock at my local store. So in that case, having access to that information and them trying to make it a seamless experience actually prevented me from visiting the store, because the basics of the store, meaning the product being there, were not being fulfilled. So important to not lose sight of that with all of these shiny objects and all of the things that, you know, larger retailers that have the deepest pockets and can experiment with things like this can do, are not things that are going to be right for every retailer. And chasing them even a little bit could divert focus from core activities that are going to be critical for any business's success. And I'll, you know, can point to examples from years or decades past. I mean, for folks who remember, you know, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, RFID was going to be the end all be all for retail and inventory management, and we were never going to have out of stocks again. And here we are 20 some odd years later, and, you know, yes, it's in use in some ways, shapes and forms, and it can help tremendously. Is it anything like what people were expecting it would be? No, not even close. So not to say that that anything around, you know, online offline experience, it fits that same category, but it is, trying to predict the future is impossible virtually. So, focusing on what's happening here and now, and, creating new experiences for the customers and a seamless experience is wonderful. But if we don't have the basics working exceptionally well, that seamless experience isn't going to matter.
I think, yeah, definitely agree with some of the basics, but just making sure that there's still that element and capacity to be able to continue to innovate and learn in a percentage of what you do is super important as things are evolving so fast and we're moving through quite a big period of change. It's how to be able to be agile and be able to make sure that you're being able to understand and test and find out and continuously learn, not necessarily commit to a lot of things, but work out and gather the data points to be able to see which direction might have a bit more longevity to it as well. So I think it's having that ability to be able to constantly have one eye on the future as well, so you don't end up getting left behind, because online as well was something that was not adopted by a number of retailers and for a long time, and so it's kind of, you can see the impact that that's had on a few of them too. So it's difficult to know, like you say, what's going to be the right thing, but by having a little bit of a stream, at least looking forwards and be able to test and innovate, really gives you that slight advantage as well when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think that's it. Oh.
Have to move to the next trend, but I do have to back Lucy back on that point, as the future is grounded on problems that we currently have in the present, but being able to understand what's happening in physical footprint by having the data, looking at it and predicting trends, and being able to enhance that customer experience by adopting new technology is the way to go. So the next trend is all about the glorious generation of Gen Z, the TikTok being real generation, and what are they expecting out of retailers. Lucy, I'm gonna have to give this back to you and see what do you think this generation expects the physical store to be like? What is the experience that they are looking for?
Yeah, sure. So this is a bit of a focus topic of ours at the moment, and we're going to be releasing a paper and an event on this soon as well. So Gen Z are a bit of a interesting generation. Their spending power is still growing, but more importantly, they're actually a really interesting lens to look through, because they seem to be a bit more of a catalyst for change and kind of a paradigm almost for some of the future and emerging trends that are happening at the moment. So things like social commerce is really growing. You've got them searching in different places now. So rather than going straight to Google, you're using more your TikToks, your Instagram to do your news, and you're searching from. So this is the generation that's really kind of proper digital natives. And also they've kind of had a very significant period of their life, more recently in the lockdown and during the pandemic as well. So you've got that craving for experiences as well. So how to combine that with some kind of changing consumer behaviors around having instant kind of expectations around service, your kind of Amazon level services for a lot of your retailers set the expectations very high, and also around availability and some of those flash trends that come through as well. So mixing that also with some of the more social elements of it. So increasingly throughout generations, you can see that brand values are actually becoming much more prominent in terms of where people choose to do their shopping. So how do you, we've spent a lot of time going from kind of mass communication through to much more personalized and targeted communications over the last few years. And now it's moving much more in the direction of what's the purpose and kind of what's that connection you can create with your consumer, and being able to drive that transparency within the sustainability elements of your business and the ethical side of things too. Making sure you've got a very solid way of doing that, and then sort of greenwashing as well. It's been in the news, people are quite hot on that too. So how do you actually get the credibility behind some of those claims that you make too? So as we dive a bit more into this and kind of explore that a little bit more, what we really strive to do with our clients is kind of, how do you think, firstly, beyond your planning cycles, as we just spoke about, in terms of looking forwards to what the future of retail really looks like, and creating that capability for continuous learning and experiments to evolve the brands. But also, how do you start to listen into some of these trends and work out what are the key things that your business needs to do? And we, again, through looking at your operations and your supply chain, how do you actually create that transparency and those join the dots with your data points, rather than looking at, say, the cost elements throughout your supply chain? Can you flip that and kind of looking at the cost to sustainability and your carbon footprint as well, and measuring that in the right way as well, to get the right messaging as well as the right data points and statistics that you can get out to your customers as well.
It's really interesting. I think one of the key things that Lucy mentioned there was actually listening to your customers. So I was reading up a little bit about Gen Z on like a Forbes article, and apparently they're influencers, they have high expectations, are less patient, and price conscious, digital natives. But I think if there's one thing that I know about younger generations, that they hate being spoken for by their older generations. So I think listening and being receptive to the feedback we're getting from them is really, really important. And when you're in store, actions often speak louder than words as well. So actually measuring what they're doing in the store is an incredibly important indicator to understanding, you know, those key drivers behind what's actually enticing them into the store and what are they doing. So the KPIs that we would typically use are age and gender segmentation percentages, both at the entrance of the store, but also with passerby traffic, so the outside location on the high street, and even with the individual product displays in the store, to actually understand what is the Gen Z customer demographic, what are they actually doing, how are they getting into the store, what do they do once they're shopping in the store. And we have an interesting case study around this with one of the UK's largest mobile network brands, where they have currently like two stores on Oxford Street with very, very different conversion rates. And they already have a very detailed market segmentation, market research from a separate agency. It goes right down to the city centre and, you know, specific shopping malls, but it doesn't go down quite to the store level granularity. And so what we saw from our data was that actually these two stores getting shopped by completely different demographics, and the one that converted higher actually had more female and younger shoppers coming in because they were engaging with the Apple displays, they were shopping the store in a different way, and they were actually much more intentioned. They were next to a large department store, a large fashion department store, so that's why they had such a change in demographic. You actually see on their journey how different it is across the store. Whereas the other store was slightly older, more male demographic. They were kind of more browsing the latest tech rather than intentioned to actually buy. And that was lowering the conversion rates in their stores. So by understanding this kind of micro level demographics, help them kind of understand how can they create more targeted, almost more bespoke experiences in each of the store. And when you bring that back to staffing, I think it's interesting to think about that, because it actually informs their staffing decisions. They can actually hire staff that are more reflective of their customers. They have a deeper affinity, and they're actually, both as the staff, they're having a better experience because they have better connection with the customers, and that's helping the business by ultimately providing a better experience, increasing conversion rates in their store.
Yeah, and I'll pick up on a couple of the points that were mentioned. One was, you know, knowing and talking to your customer, and two is, you know, the use of data, and especially with the younger generation, Daniel, I'll echo what you said. Is, you know, it's very difficult to speak for them. Almost impossible if you have kids, you know that. But talking to them is always appreciated. So, you know, in a world of massive data and online tools and so on, we sometimes forget that we can walk into our own stores and talk to our own customers, and we should do that more often. Now, you can't take what any one customer says as a golden rule, but you know, I personally think that business executives need to spend more time out in their stores talking to their customers, engaging with those younger customers and hearing from them directly, not from a 20-page report that a bunch of consultants put together about that demographic. Go talk to them. And don't be overly swayed by broader trends of that group if they don't apply to you as a retailer. If you are a clothing retailer that caters largely to a younger consumer, the impact of these groups and how they are shopping and how they are evolving will affect you dramatically differently than if you're, say, Home Depot and you just want to make sure that you capture their business versus Lowe's as they age and buy their own home. So the way that you are going to engage with these groups differs. So know who your customer is, know how they shop your store, talk to them, find out what they are looking for, and make sure you are meeting their needs, versus trying to say, we now need to address the needs of all millennials and Gen Z. Good luck. But target it to what you are doing, find out what will move the needle for your business with these groups.
Yeah, definitely agree with what all of you said. And to relate back like all the three trends. So we said that automation helps with staff shortages, and it helps retailers create an infrastructure where they can offer a more flexible work environment, give their staff more autonomy in how they interact with customers in the physical store. Also, that same interactive that same infrastructure allows them to see what kind of data, to compare the data they have in the physical store with the online stores as well, and create more interactive experiences where the physical store data feeds into whatever digital experiences they're creating and drives back traffic to the physical store. So they're creating this omni-channel loop where brands are actually engaging with based on accurate data that they collected from the stores. And the last point is that to attract Gen Z, it is important to have that infrastructure in place, to have that staff being happy working for the brand, so they can reflect the values of the brand and reflect an experience that is transparent, more authentic, and can attract Gen Z into the brands and retailer store. So the last point, the two last points that we wanted to talk about is inflation and what we're seeing in the news, that we're in a global recession and everyone should be very conservative on their spending habits. I mean, that's what the media is telling us today, but how does that affect the retailers, and how has it affected the retailers in the last few months? And I'll leave that to any of you who wants to go first, actually.
Yeah, I can go first on this. So it's interesting because some retailers have raised like very large funds recently, so they're actually really innovating in all of their technology platforms at the moment, whereas others that don't have that are being much more conservative. They're looking at budgets on a much longer time scale. So rather than 3 months ahead, they're looking at 12 months ahead in terms of budget allocation. So it's really interesting to see that kind of divergence in the market. Some retailers that are just absolutely spending hell for leather, trying to innovate, trying to catch like the latest trends, and others that are pulling back. And I think it is going to be a case of weeding out the weaker players, in a sense. So I think there's a lot of consolidation happening in the market at the moment. The bigger players are getting bigger. It's getting harder for some of the mid-level players to compete. But then at the other end of the spectrum, we're seeing lots of other smaller independent retailers coming up to the fray, where they're actually bringing absolutely new concepts, they're really innovating, and that's really good for the market because they're doing things that some of the larger players are a little bit more risk averse trying. And so I think there's always this kind of to and fro in the market, but it's an interesting time at the moment, to say the least. I've just had a question from Martin, which is similar to this, Rita. It's like, due to the recent economic pressures, do you think the drop in physical retail stores is a temporary fix or a more long-term solution? So is it something that we need to battle now? Is it something that needs to be thought about on a 5-10 year horizon? I think that's an interesting question to pose.
Yeah, I mean, and on that note, I mean, been through as a business person. This is my, depending on how you count COVID, third recession, fourth if you count COVID as its own little mini blip. But the story itself doesn't fundamentally change, right? The period of recession is difficult. It generally tends to separate winners from losers. People who invest smartly will tend to accelerate or increase the gap between them and the rest of the pack. And those who don't, more of them tend to disappear during a recession. And we can see that same pattern. The cause of the recession, the type of recession, those may differ, but the story itself doesn't change. We see stores closing, and we ask the same questions in early 2000s, in 2008. Is this the death of the mall, the death of the retailer, et cetera? The answer always is no, but we always are fearful of the same thing. Do we know that the answer will still be no? No, we don't know anything for a fact. But are we pretty sure that retailers are still going to be here come the end of this recession? Yes. So in part, it's writing it out safely and making smart investments to separate yourself from the pack. And more so than any other time, don't make bad or silly investments. Just because something sounds cool, if you don't have any evidence that it's going to move the needle on your business, don't invest the time or money in it, especially now.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, Mark, Lucy, and Dan. We're looking forward to seeing how the trends develop throughout this year and what would be happening next.